Let me just show you a couple of things that have been in the news here yesterday. I believe this was Reuters is reporting that Iran threatens new offensive while U.S. rules out extending ceasefire deal. Iran will shift to a fully offensive military posture because efforts to negotiate a permanent end to the war with the U.S. have stalled. A senior Iranian official told Reuters on Monday as Washington has ruled out extending a temporary ceasefire. So right now, the MOU, even the MOU itself, the period has expired. Well, this was also yesterday from the Hormuz letter. They're claiming that, according to their sources, Iran is going to give or has already given the U.S. an ultimatum of 3 to 4 weeks to meet all of its demands, which will severely escalate in the Strait of Hormuz, which is in the things you see written down there. That's what Ghalibaf said today. So that gives some credence to that. Then we also have this from the Wall Street Journal. I think this was also yesterday. Said that after President signed the memorandum of understanding with Iran in mid-June, administration officials fanned out to build support for an agreement they hoped would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and wind down the road. But Iran's hardline leaders huddled in Tehran came up with a different plan. According to Iranian and Arab officials, in their view, the pact was likely just an attempt by the U.S. and Israel to take pressure off the global economy at the moment and buy time for a bigger attack plan down the road. Instead of putting faith in talks, they took the past 2 months to prepare for a bigger fight, they being Iran in that case. So they're saying MOU was just an attempt to get some oil out, to relieve the pressure on the price of oil, and then build up for a bigger strike. So they believe, and I have confirmed this through one source that I have in Tehran, that is what they believe. And the implication being they well may start the next round, not wait to be hit. What do you think?
This goes back to the earlier point that we were making about the people that are in charge in Tehran. These are people who are radically different from the people who were in charge just 90 or 180 days ago. They harbor no illusions, and they see a lot of evidence that we continue to move weapons and equipment and supplies into the region. They see a carrier leaves and they see another carrier shows up. So what are they supposed to conclude? They're concluding exactly what you described. So the next question is, if they're going to move to an offensive posture, what does that look like? Well, one thing they've made abundantly clear is that they're quite prepared to destroy all of the oil infrastructure along with the various desalination plants on the western side of the Persian Gulf. That would be catastrophic. That would be the end of Saudi Arabia and, frankly, most of the population that lives there. I think we said there were 40 to 60 million people, somewhere like that, from Iraq all the way down to the UAE's border with Oman. That doesn't appear to be the case any longer. I don't know what the actual numbers are now, but a large number of people have very wisely left the region. So I guess in that sense, it would be fewer human losses, but still, that's one thing they can do. The other question, and we can't answer this very easily, is how far can they reach out and touch us at sea? Now, the U.S. Navy and the people running it have an understanding of those limitations, and they've been cautious. They've moved their assets much further away from shore than they have in a long time. We can't afford to lose these big capital ships. They cannot be easily replaced. We just went through the discussion of, you've got what, less than 189 ships now, and of that number, what is it, a third or more are actually committed to this operation in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. We don't have 300 or 400 ships anymore. So we're unlikely to take very many risks in that regard. But can the Iranians have an impact? Can they reach out and touch us? I think we saw in one of the attacks that was aimed at Diego Garcia that they've been working on that capability. So I don't think that's an impossibility. And I guess you could reach out beyond the Middle East. There are other areas where we could be struck and hit and harmed and hurt. I don't think they'll come to the continental United States. But given the state of affairs down in Mexico and the chaos down there, that's always been our strategic soft underbelly. Wouldn't be very difficult. Organized crime and terrorism go hand in hand. They could do things in Mexico that could harm us in the Southwest. We don't know. And I don't have access to any of the sensitive intelligence that would give us a real to that.
You know, President Trump often says, you know, we have literally unlimited amounts of ammunition, et cetera, to face this. We also like to be the ones that initiate everything. We decide when something's going to happen. We decide how big it's going to happen, et cetera. But what happens if Iran decides to take the initiative, and then now we have to react. We had this from Vice President Vance a couple of days ago, talking about the tools that he says that we have. Do the tools he mentions here, are they sufficient to react to something if the Iranian side takes the next move?
The Iranians sometimes make commitments that they don't honor. They make a deal, they don't honor the deal. And I understand your point about the seesaw nature of this, but I think what that reflects is that we have a lot of tools at our disposal to compel action. And sometimes we're focused on the energy piece of it because we want Americans to be able to afford the price of oil and gas. Sometimes we're obviously focused on the military nature of it. Sometimes we're focused on the nuclear program. So I think what is really happening is that you're seeing a president of the United States at the height of his authority with a lot of tools.
Does he have a lot of tools? I mean, what tools do we have to react to that kind? If Iran does what you hits that target list that you were talking about there, what tools do we have to react to that?
Well, I know that we're keeping roughly 32% of the profits, any of the oil that is sold that comes out of Venezuela, which is a very high percentage. It's actually higher than the sort of reparations that we insisted the Germans pay after World War I. At that point, we and the Allies were taking 13% of whatever the Germans exported. So that's kind of an interesting comparison, 13% after World War I and 32% today. And the argument was, well, we're using that to pay for the initial operation that captured Maduro and his wife. But obviously, it goes far beyond that. I don't know what other things he's talking about. If we're talking about more sanctions, more bullying, more pressure in that regard, I don't think those things can have the desired effect. I think whatever happens in that department is going to be either shrugged off or defeated. And it'll be defeated with the help of other countries increasingly aligning with Iran. And that's one of the things that I don't think we realize. We're beginning to see the gradual arming and weaponization of what I would call the BRICS alliance. It started out as simply a giant trade union. In other words, an operation to build an alternative to our financial system, which we exploit and employ to bully people to get them to do what we want. How do you get out from under it? Well, you leave it. And you operate entirely in this new China-centric financial system that is emerging around BRICS. So I think those things are underway. And some people call that de-dollarization. I think that's underway. What I guess I'm driving at is we've done an enormous amount of damage to ourselves. I don't see any evidence that anything we do at this point against Iran is going to be good for the United States, the American people, and our long-term strategic interests. But I don't think there is any long-term strategy. I don't think we've ever had a long-term strategy. The only one we can point to in recent years is obviously containment within the last several decades, and that's gone by the wayside. So this is a very short-sighted operation with very short-term interests. The interest to annihilate Iran, make them, surrender, if you will, to Donald Trump. Good luck. Don't think
okay, so let me ask you a hard question here. Again, if Iran does take the initiative here, and if they start a sequence that spawns a response by the United States kinetic, and then that they take that as a I guess taking the gloves off, and they hit all those targets you mentioned, which is gonna I don't think it can have any effect other than having a catastrophic economic impact, major recession, possibly depression on the United States, which is going to cause us a great deal of problems throughout the world. What is the possibility or the implications, maybe even a better way to put it, for Iran to calculate, hey, listen, we can start a next round here that will definitely have a response, and they'll hit our oil infrastructure, they'll hit our energy, and it'll be very, very painful and a long time to fix. But that could ultimately cause the defeat of the United States, and our long-term objectives may be met. Is that a calculation that they could rationally choose?
I think it is. And I think that you're talking about damage done to the Persian Gulf region and its infrastructure that would require at least 10 years to recover. So you're talking about a definite global level depression, and I think we're well on our way in that direction at this point as well. One of the things that's kind of interesting is to watch Scott Bessent. and he's very sensitive to the market. We're now way over 5% in the 30-year bonds. This last bond sale was enormously expensive for us. We're in a lot of trouble financially. And Scott Bessent is using every conceivable trick and illusion that he has in his bag to sort of postpone the inevitable financial collapse that I think is coming. I've always looked at, because I have great confidence and trust in what Jeffrey Goodluck and Luke Groen and others talk about. I also look at this 5% barrier on the 10-year bond, and everybody makes it very clear if you break that and you go over 5% yield on the 10-year bond, you're in uncharted territory, and that could be catastrophic for us.
You see, we're getting close to that now.
Yeah, this is the end of the petrodollar system, which is, again, frankly, at this stage, dead anyway, which just recycled dollars from the Persian Gulf back into the United States. That's gone. You don't find anybody wants to invest in our debt. We sort of postponed a collapse in Japan, but doing so harmed the euro because we used the euro. Of course, as a banker said to me the other day in Europe, he said, "Who are we kidding? The euro and the dollar are the same thing. It's all dollars." I said, "Oh, okay." I think we're in a very fragile set of conditions right now financially.
So let me ask you this:
I guess I don't know which one breaks first, Dan. Does it break here at home financially first, or does it blow up in the Gulf and then break here financially? I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just a matter of maybe the sequence, not whether. In the event that happens, let's just kind of put this in the context of the world that we're heading into. So by all accounts, there's going to be a bloodbath come November. We're now less than 90 days out to that. And the likelihood is that the next Congress that seats on January 3rd of next year is going to be overwhelmingly Democratic. It's possible even the Senate could go blue as well. I've heard from some folks here in Washington that claim to have some knowledge that the Democrats already have a cohorted plan that they're just going to do investigation after investigation, probably impeachment series, whatever, to completely hamstring President Trump and the Democrats or the Republicans through the next 2 years heading into 2028. That's apparently their plan. So when you have this political dysfunction, which is going to just keep President Trump on the defensive the whole time, at the same time that we have, if this goes back into kinetic and we have a severe economic strain on us, what concerns do you have about the viability and the stability of the United States domestically?
It cost the Jewish Zionist power structure in the United States an estimated $37 million to expel Thomas Massie from office. Now, what will it cost them to retain control of enough of the House and the Senate to prevent Donald Trump's removal from office? I don't know. But if it costs $37 million to expel just one member, and they have a lot of money. I mean, there are pots of money that they have been accumulating out there, and I'm talking about this Zionist Jewish power structure involving hundreds of millions of dollars. It could be applied with the goal of preventing Donald Trump from being removed so that they can retain control of the United States government. Now, they've already got it at this point because we know that 80% of the House and the Senate is effectively paid by the lobby to do what it wants. So that's a fact. You just run through, look at the amounts of money that go in there. And it's amazing. Sometimes it's a lot of money and sometimes it's not that much. But members are so greedy for money and so desperate for money to stay in office that they'll do almost anything to keep it. So I guess my assumption is that this election is probably not going to go well for Trump in particular. But the real issue is, what about this lobby? Can it retain control? That, I think it has a shot at doing so. I wouldn't write it off yet. Now, of course, that could change if the financial system crashes between now and November, and that's not an impossibility. I mean, if you listen to Ray Dalio and others, they'll say it could very easily happen. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Can't know with precision when this sort of thing happens, but that could. Now, when you talk about domestic tranquility, remember we have over 50 million people inside the United States right now who are not born here. How many of those are illegal? How many of those are legal? I don't know what the exact breakdown is, but normally the numbers that you get from the federal government, depending on the administration, are lies. They're not true. So I think we have tens of millions of illegals in the country. What will most of them do? And I think it depends. It also depends on people that hold U.S. citizenship, but frankly, they're only nominally Americans. I mean, they sort of sit there and say, I'm an American. Okay. What makes you American? Well, I have citizenship. Well, popcorn, candy, citizenship. Take your pick. It's not that difficult to acquire, frankly. Not for anybody with any kind of money or influence. It's tougher for somebody without any. And a lot of people have worked very hard to get that citizenship, which is one of the reasons they're angry about illegal immigration. But my point is, we don't know how lots of groups will, react. Some groups can go back to where they came from, at least until things here calm down. Other groups have nothing to go back to. And then you have the question of the rule of law. Where do we stand on that right now? How many police or policemen have left the service because they're afraid to do their jobs? They're afraid that if they do their jobs, they'll end up in front of a judge, and this judge is going to castigate them and ultimately crucify them and put them in jail when what they did was their job. How do you fix these things? Remember, if we go back to 2016, these are the things that Donald Trump was elected to do. It didn't work out very well for him because he didn't know what he was doing during his first term. Then there was the hope that if he got a second term, or in this case, the term that comes after Biden, that he may have learned something and got something right. We discovered this time around he's not even in control. He doesn't govern. It's the lobby that governs. So what could happen? I think everything from outright social disintegration, societal disintegration into chaos, to mild unrest in all of the nation's big cities, because it's in the cities that are concentrated two kinds of people. Very high end income people, not very many, but a lot. And then at the other end, large numbers of people who have nothing. And if they can't get what they need to survive and they already have nothing, they tend to be reckless. So I can't go into any greater detail, but I think we have to accept the fact that none of this is good news. And it makes you wonder just how completely out of touch everybody in Washington is. And every time I visit the place and I talk to people, I think they're living in somewhere along the line of the 1960s or the late 80s, early 90s. They're not living in the world that is America today.
That's one of the things I worry about that very thing, because it's unknown, but it's almost certainly going to be bad if we go down this path, which we seem to be heading down. And the amount of time I have left with you, I want to shift gears over to the Russia-Ukraine war, because there's some continuing developments that are going on over there, which is not good for the Ukraine side. But I think we talked last time you were on that Ukraine has now effectively run out of interceptor missiles, even if they weren't that effective. Even when they're all functioning. Now they don't even have them to function at all, which means the skies are just wide open to whatever Russia wants to do. But as you were talking about before we went on the air here, there's also another development on the Russian side, which could have some impact on what could come next. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this comment that Gerasimov, their chief of their general staff, is coming to the end of his, I think, an extended term that he had already. According to Russian law, he's not going to be able to. Might they replace him with somebody who had a different mindset?
Well, before we leave completely the war zone, we need to understand that very recently the Ukrainians successfully launched an estimated 100 unmanned systems, drones, that had been supplied by the British. The British incorporated new engines that gave them greater range, also a little bit more speed, making them harder to shoot down. So you're talking about essentially cruise missiles that fly about 20 feet above the treetops. They fly very fast. They came in great numbers. They struck targets in Moscow as well as Volgograd. I've forgotten the third city, but the point is they did a lot of damage. Now, is this damage going to stop Russia in its tracks? No. Is it going to make life harder for the average Russian? Not really. But it was a very disturbing event because you're talking about large numbers of these weapons penetrating air defenses simply because the radars couldn't pick them up. And when they did pick them up, it was too late. They had already passed. But remember, these things came largely from Great Britain. And this goes back to the other issue that we discussed a few weeks ago, which is how much longer do the Russians wait before they take action directly against the British and other states in NATO that are actively supplying this stuff to the Ukrainians. Remember, this is not going to change the outcome of the war. Ukraine is losing. It's going to continue to lose. It'll be devastated. In fact, more and more of us looking at this, and the few people left in Ukraine, less than half of what were there at the beginning, wonder if there will even be a Ukraine on the map. That's another subject, but I think we have to take that into consideration. On the ground, we see dramatic advances towards Zaporizhzhia. We see the bridge at Zaporizhzhia, which is, I'm told, still structurally sound, but has been at least partially destroyed. Not that it makes a great deal of difference, because if anybody can throw bridges across the Dnieper River quickly and effectively, it's the Russians. And I think they can do that. So I don't think they're all that dependent on that bridge, though it's a very nice bridge and can hold a lot of weight. But I think what we're seeing is that the movement towards Odessa is very real, and it's begun. Odessa has been cut off. It's blockaded from the sea. It is no longer the artery of support and sustainment for the Ukrainians. And the Russians have actually sent in Spetsnaz and come out with lots of prisoners, some of whom I'm told are NATO officers. We don't admit to any of that, and we will not confirm any of that, but I think that's going on. So my perception is we're at the beginning of the end for Odessa, and we're seeing dramatic movement in the south. I know that the Russians are on the outskirts of Kharkov. When they plan to pull the string on that is anybody's guess. And then again, you now have, someone told me, as many as 20,000 or more North Korean troops up in Belarusia, north of Korea, along with 90 to 100,000 other Russian and Belarusian troops. Those could be hurled on very short notice south in the direction of Kiev. So the reason I bring all that up is that one thing is very clear. The Russians have at their disposal all the weapons, all the capabilities, and I would argue all the troops they need to end this war.